The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound in the corridor of St. Augustine Medical Center, New York. A pale, sterile glow washed over polished tiles and stretched shadows. Yet for Noah Martinez, the man who once bent boardrooms to silence with a glance, everything felt strangely weightless, suspended in air too thin to breathe. He stood frozen. The scent of antiseptic lingered sharp and medicinal, but it drifted through him like smoke, meaningless against the storm that had just torn open in his chest. He wasn't looking at the hallway. He wasn't seeing the polished glass. He wasn't even aware of the half-empty paper cup of coffee cooling in his hand. His gaze had locked on the window of the maternity ward. 5 bassinets lined the glass like small, fragile vessels on a hushed sea. Nurses moved between them quietly, tucking in blankets, checking tiny monitors, humming lullabies that dissolved into the air. And in each crib lay a child newborn, swaddled in pastel blue and green faces. Tender breaths, shallow, unformed. Noah's eyes narrowed, and the world stilled. Because 5 children stared back at him through glass, through time, through everything he believed unshakable. And they carried his eyes. Not a vague resemblance. Not the ordinary echo of features shared among strangers. But unmistakable the glacial blue hue, the precise tilt, the piercing clarity that had made headlines and glossy covers. Those eyes were his mirror, multiplied by 5 blinking at a sterile ceiling, unaware that they had just rewritten the script of his existence. His heartbeat stumbled, then roared. Noah Martinez had lived beneath the weight of an irreversible truth for 15 years. He could never be a father. Doctors had told him so at 19. Calm, clinical, definitive. Sterile. Genetic. Final. He had folded the grief inward, silent, invisible. No tears, no public mourning. Just a vow: if he couldn't create a legacy through blood, he would do so through empire, and the empire he built. Orion Systems. The tech giant that made him one of America's youngest billionaires was supposed to be his heir, his monument. A world-changing company, a dynasty of code and capital. He had told himself he didn't need more. Until now. Because those 5 children carried not Orion's algorithms, not his company's innovations, but his eyes. He whispered the name that had haunted him across 2 years of silence. Gianna Robinson. The syllables tightened his throat. 2 years since she walked out. 2 years since he found their apartment stripped bare, her half of the life they had shared folded into cardboard boxes and gone. 2 years since he stood in that kitchen, staring at a note written in looping, delicate script. I can't breathe in your shadow anymore. He had never answered. He hadn't known how. And now, this rumor had led him here. A whispered comment at a gala spoken by someone's wife, half gossip, half pity. Didn't you hear Gianna? Babies. Hospital. He'd laughed it off. Gianna babies. She had always said she wasn't ready, but the whisper clung like static, restless, refusing to fade. That night he paced his penthouse until dawn, restless in rooms filled with too much glass and not enough air. By morning, instinct, not logic, had driven him into his car and down streets he hadn't visited since she left. And now, standing here, the unthinkable truth blinked at him from 5 pairs of eyes. The man who had stared down mergers worth billions now stood unraveling before 5 tiny strangers. Or not strangers. Perhaps never strangers. His children. The question sliced through him raw and merciless. His diagnosis, was it wrong? Had Gianna known? Did she carry this alone, believing he wouldn't care? Or worse, that he wouldn't come? His trench coat hung heavy on his frame, wool suffocating in this fragile space. Noah Martinez, the golden boy of Fortune magazine, The visionary who silenced senators and swayed nations with code felt undone by 5 infants and a glass window. The corridor tilted. His knees locked. The silence pressed in. Then footsteps. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand, her tone gentle but firm. "Sir, are you all right?" He tried to answer, but air scraped out thin and useless. Her voice softened. "Are you here for someone?" His lips parted and he managed a single name. Gianna Robinson. The nurse paused, glanced at her chart and nodded slowly. "She's in room 814. Visiting hours end in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Noah nodded faintly. His legs obeyed step by step, though his body felt carved from stone. He moved toward the door, but the glass window pulled at him like a magnet. One of the infants stirred, a curl of dark hair spilling from beneath a cap. The child's eyes opened, and there it was again, undeniable, irrevocable. Not strangers, his. The truth slammed into him not as a beginning, but as a reckoning. The life he had chosen, control, ambition, power built on the certainty that he would never be anyone's father, was crumbling piece by piece beneath the weight of a single look. His world had changed the moment he saw those eyes. And perhaps yours might too, because sometimes the truths we live by are only the ones we've been told. And sometimes life itself dares to rewrite the script. The hallway stretched endlessly toward room 814. Every polished tile echoed with his footsteps, each heavier than the last. Noah Martinez was unshakable to the world, sharp, deliberate, decisive. But in this sterile corridor, he was nothing more than a man hollowed out by shock, clinging to questions without answers. He reached for the doorknob. His hand trembled. Through the frosted glass panel, a blurred silhouette moved, a woman slender and strong, her posture carrying the weight of exhaustion, but also of unyielding grace. Her curls were pinned loosely, tendrils falling against her neck. She held something close, an infant swaddled, pressed against her chest, rocked in rhythm to a soft, low hum. Noah's heart lurched. That voice, even muffled through glass, tugged at memory. The lullabies Gianna once sang when he coded through sleepless nights. The hum that turned thunder into warmth, storm into solace. He knocked softly at first. She didn't turn. The second knock was louder. This time she shifted, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned, curiosity lifting her gaze toward the door, until recognition froze her in place. Their eyes met through blurred glass, and 2 years collapsed into silence. Noah inhaled sharply. He had rehearsed this reunion 100 times in fury, grief, and desperate pleas. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for the sight of Gianna Robinson, arms cradling a child, eyes guarded yet unbearably familiar. The door between them felt heavier than iron, and still his hand tightened on the handle. Sometimes stories don't begin with fireworks. Sometimes they start with silence, with a breath caught in your chest, with the sight of something you thought you could never have. For Noah, the sight of 5 children, 5 fragments of truth, shattered everything he believed about himself. For Gianna, it was the return of the man she once loved, standing uncertain, undone. And for us, it's the beginning of a journey. If your heart paused when Noah's did, if you felt that ache of shock and recognition, perhaps this story has already touched you. Stay with us, because beyond that door lies a confrontation of love loss and second chances that could change everything. If this moment moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you feel if you were Noah, staring into the eyes you thought you'd never pass? Tap the like button if you want to see where this story leads. And follow our channel to walk with Noah and Gianna through every fragile, decisive step ahead, because their story isn't finished. The door creaked open. Noah stepped across the threshold as if crossing into another world, one smaller than the penthouses and offices that had defined his existence, yet infinitely larger in meaning. The sterile scent of disinfectant still clung to the air, but underneath it lingered something softer, warmer, the faint powder of newborn skin, the musky sweetness of milk, the unmistakable breath of life. And there she was. Gianna Robinson stood only a few feet away, her back against the dim light of the window, her arms cradling an infant swaddled in mint green. Her silhouette was leaner than he remembered, her shoulders narrower, her posture taut with exhaustion. Yet her presence was unmistakable. Though pulled into a careless bun, those curls still escaped to graze her neck the way they always had. Her voice, low, soothing, hummed an unfamiliar lullaby, but it wrapped around him like the echoes of home. She turned. For one suspended second, her dark eyes locked on his. Once those eyes had been quick to laughter, soft with affection, open in ways the world had never been to them. Now they were guarded sharper, as if life had carved edges where tenderness once lived. But even sharpened, even shielded, they were still Gianna's, and they still unraveled him. He swallowed. His throat was dry, his voice barely more than a breath. Gianna. Her name fractured the silence between them. She didn't answer. The child in her arms stirred a soft whimper rising, pulling her gaze downward. She adjusted instinctively, rocking her lips, brushing the infant's brow. The sight pierced Noah, more than any argument could have. She had built a world without him, carried life without him, and now stood stronger for it, even if weariness lined every movement. I saw them, he said finally, his words faltering the baby's. Her eyes flicked back up, wary, unreadable. He drew in a breath. They have my eyes. A pause stretched taut as a wire. Gianna's gaze faltered for the briefest instant. Then she exhaled. Yes. The single syllable cracked open his chest. He stumbled back a half step as if struck. A hammer to the ribs, a blow to everything he thought he knew. His breath fractured, and he steadied himself against the chair's edge. They're mine. He whispered the question, trembling with disbelief. She hesitated, her lips parting as if the truth itself was too heavy to carry. Then slowly she nodded. Yes. The world tipped. His hand rose to his mouth, fingers pressed hard against skin to ground himself. The magnitude of her affirmation settled like a weight, crushing and liberating at once. He was a father, against every prognosis, every doctor's verdict, every truth he had swallowed. For half his life, he was a father. His voice cracked. How many? 5. Gianna answered, quiet but steady. His chest constricted. 5. Her gaze didn't waver. Quintuplets. 3 girls, 2 boys. The word thundered in his mind. Quintuplets. The scale of it, 5 lives, 5 heartbeats, 5 futures, was almost beyond comprehension. The reality of 5 children was humbling and terrifying for a man who had measured legacy in market shares and mergers. How? The word slipped out, raw, unfinished. I was told that you were sterile. She cut in her voice, neither cruel nor gentle, but precise like a scalpel. He nodded, shame threading his veins. Gianna's tone softened slightly, though the firmness remained. So did I. Until I found out I was pregnant. I ran the tests twice. Then again, they said your diagnosis wasn't conclusive, just early incomplete. Rare but possible. Noah's breath shook. He lifted his gaze to hers, desperate. Did you know before you left? Her reply was immediate, resolute. No. I found out weeks after. I tried to call you. He froze. Her eyes hardened. But you changed your number. Guilt sliced through him like glass. He had shut every door, burned every bridge, convinced that her leaving was rejection, not a cry for air. He'd thought disappearing was survival. In reality, he had made himself unreachable. I thought— He stopped the words, choking. I thought you didn't want me. Gianna's jaw tightened. I didn't want to be forgotten. Or worse, resented. The baby whimpered again, anchoring them both in the fragile present. She soothed with practiced grace, her body moving on instinct. Noah's chest ached. You carried this alone, all of it. Her gaze sharpened, daring him to deny it. Yes. He closed his eyes. He deserved her anger, deserved her silence. And yet as he opened them again, he couldn't stop himself from whispering, I should have been here. Her voice was steady, stripped of accusation, yet heavier than any condemnation. You weren't. The truth stung more than blame ever could. For a long moment, silence stretched, filled only by the soft breath of the child. Then Gianna shifted, holding the baby higher, pressing a bottle into Noah's unsteady hands. Her voice was firm but quiet. If you want to be here now, start with this one. She's hungry. Noah froze, staring at the bottle as though it were something sacred. His hands shook as he took it, clumsy and unsure. Gianna guided him wordlessly, adjusting his grip, steadying the baby's fragile head. The infant instinctively opened her mouth, latched onto the bottle, and began drinking. Noah's breath caught. His arms stiffened at first, afraid of breaking something so small. But slowly, guided by Gianna's gentle touch, he found a rhythm. The child's tiny fingers curled around his thumb, her eyes fluttering shut as she suckled. He stared, unable to look away. His daughter. The word thundered inside him, surreal and luminous. His daughter. What's her name? He whispered. Leora, Gianna said softly. It means light. Noah repeated the name under his breath, reverent. Leora. It fit. Fragile, luminous. Light in the dark. And the others? He asked, still hushed. Gianna's eyes softened almost imperceptibly as she spoke. Noel, Sienna, Micah, Gabriel. Noah closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the names like a litany. A hymn, 5 worlds each with a name and a future he had missed. When he opened them again, his voice trembled. They all have my eyes. Gianna's lips pressed together, and for the first time a flicker of something like amusement ghosted across her expression, except for Micah. He has your scowl. Noah's breath hitched in a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. He looked at her, startled, and saw it just the faintest curl of a smile at the corner of her lips. It vanished quickly, but it was enough to pierce him. Enough to remind him of nights filled with laughter debates over code-whispered dreams beneath blankets. Enough to remind him of everything he had lost. He stared down at Leora again, her lashes brushing her cheeks, as she fed her tiny hand, still clinging to his thumb. And for the first time in years, Noah Martinez, billionaire mogul visionary, felt like nothing more and nothing less than a father. Time folded strangely in room 814. Gianna settled into the chair, exhaustion etched into her posture, yet her arms never loosened their strength. Noah sat opposite her, still holding Leora. His movements stiff but deliberate. Between them stretched a silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken words, fractured trust, aching history. He wanted to say 1,000 things, apologies, promises, confessions. But the weight of her eyes kept him still. At last he managed, I want to know them. I want to know you again, if you'll let me. Gianna's gaze lingered on him, unreadable, measuring. Then, after a long pause, she said, You can start. And for the first time since he stepped into the hospital, Noah felt something shift. Not forgiveness, Not absolution, but a beginning. Fragile, tentative, but real. A beginning. The nights in St. Augustine Medical Center had a rhythm of their own, neither night nor day, but something suspended between beeping monitors, soft footsteps, and the hushed murmurs of exhausted nurses. For 9 days, Room 814 became a world within a world that had nothing to do with boardrooms or stock prices, but everything to do with the fragile breaths of 5 infants. Noah had not left. The hospital staff, accustomed to parents fading in and out, watched him with curiosity and disbelief. He wasn't polished now, not the man from magazine covers and business reports. His suits wrinkled his jaw, rough with stubble, his movements uncertain. Yet he stayed. Every feeding, every diaper, every cry. He stayed. Gianna didn't make it easy. She didn't hand him trust like a gift. She let him fumble, let him fail, let him sit in his own clumsy determination. She corrected only when necessary. An angle too sharp for a bottle, a grip too stiff for a newborn's neck. Otherwise, she watched. Her silence became a mirror and a test, and Noah learned to move inside it. The first night nearly broke him. Micah wailed from one bassinet, Sienna fussed in another, and Gabriel twisted in restless discomfort. Noah moved between them like a man thrown into a storm without a compass. He dropped wipes, fumbled tabs on diapers, and spilled formula on his sleeve. By 3 in the morning, his arms ached, his head pounded, and sweat clung to his back. Gianna sat in the chair rocking Noel with practiced ease, her expression unreadable. When Noah muttered, "I'm failing," she didn't soothe him with denial. She only said, "They're still breathing, aren't they?" And somehow the simplicity steadied him more than comfort could. By dawn, he had learned the cadence of a cry, the difference between Micah's hungry fuss and Leora's tired whimper. Small lessons, imperfect victories, but his. On the 4th night it happened. Gabriel's breathing hitched sharp and shallow. The monitor blinked red, the alarm slicing through the quiet. Noah froze, blood draining from his face. Nurses rushed in. Gianna rose instantly, her body taut with panic, but her movements efficient, precise. The medical team swarmed voices, clipped commands exchanged. Noah stood at the edge of the room, helpless, his chest pounding like it would fracture. "Is he?" His voice cracked, but no one answered. Gianna's hands hovered near Gabriel as they checked oxygen levels, adjusted wires, and pressed small fingers. Her face was stone, her eyes glass. The world narrowed to the shrill rhythm of machines. Then slowly the monitor steadied. The cries softened. Gabriel's chest rose and fell again, fragile but sure. Relief crashed through Noah so hard his knees buckled. He pressed his palms against the cold counter, dragging in a breath that felt like fire. Gianna sank back into the chair, her body trembling once the crisis had passed. She lifted her hands to her face for one fleeting second, then lowered them recomposed. Noah crossed the room slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. He wanted to reach for her touch, her shoulder, and say anything that might ease the sharp edges of her fear. But when his hand hovered, she shifted slightly, and he let it fall. Instead, he said quietly, "I thought I'd lost him." Her voice was low, steady, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "I've thought that every night since they were born." The weight of her words pressed against him like stone. For the first time, he understood, not just intellectually, but in his bones, the enormity of what she had carried alone. 5 fragile lives balanced on her breath, her vigilance, her will. He whispered, "You shouldn't have had to do this by yourself." Gianna looked at him, then eyes sharp, unsparing. "But I did." The silence that followed was not accusation, not anger, but fact, and it sliced deeper than blame ever could. After Gabriel's scare, Noah changed. He stopped hesitating. He stopped waiting for permission. He rose when the monitors blinked, measured bottles without waiting to be asked, learned the rhythm of sterilizing equipment, the angle of swaddling blankets. He stayed awake through dawn, his body clumsy, but his persistence unshaken. One night, Sienna cried inconsolably, her tiny fists curled tight. Noah carried her, pacing the narrow length of the room, his voice a low hum. The tune was crooked, off-key, but steady. Slowly, she calmed her sobs, fading into soft hiccups. Half asleep in the chair, Gianna opened her eyes just enough to watch him. She didn't speak, but something in her gaze shifted almost imperceptibly. Later, her fingers brushed his wrist when she reached to take Sienna back. The touch was brief, accidental, yet electric with unspoken history. Neither of them acknowledged it, but both felt it. The nights taught them a new language. It wasn't spoken, not entirely. It was in the way Gianna placed a bottle on the counter near his hand without words, in the way Noah draped a blanket across her shoulders when she dozed in the chair, in the way they moved around each other, two bodies learning to occupy the same fragile space without colliding. Their silences weren't empty. They held weight, memory, and something neither dared name yet. Noah learned to listen to her quiet instructions, the press of her palm showing how to support a head, the tilt of her chin indicating which child needed attention. Gianna learned he didn't leave when things grew messy and stayed even when his hands shook and his breath faltered. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. On the sixth night, exhaustion cracked her armor. Noelle fussed endlessly, her cries piercing, insistent. Gianna, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness, held the baby close, rocking, soothing, humming. But her arms trembled, her lips pressed thin with fatigue. "Give her to me," Noah said gently. Gianna shook her head. "I've got it." "Gianna," he said softly, stepping closer. "You haven't slept in 2 days." Her jaw tightened. "I can do it." He hesitated, then whispered, "You don't have to." The words landed like a stone in water, rippling outward. For a moment she froze, her eyes locked on his, something raw flickering in her expression. Then slowly she passed Noelle into his arms. Noah held the infant close, rocking gently, whispering nonsense syllables, letting his voice weave rhythm. The cries softened and faded until Noelle's lashes brushed her cheeks in sleep. Gianna sank into the chair, her body slumping, her eyes closing for just a breath longer than a blink. Noah looked down at the child in his arms, then at the woman who had borne her. His chest tightened. He had missed so much, but he would not miss this. Not again. By the 9th morning, the city outside the hospital was stirring awake. Yellow cabs flashing past delivery trucks, rumbling the hum of New York rising. Inside room 814, the world was quieter, dimmer, wrapped in the soft glow of morning light. Noah stood near the window, Gabriel asleep against his chest, tiny breaths rising and falling. Gianna leaned against the opposite wall, her arms folded, watching. Her voice was low, rough with fatigue. "You're learning." Noah turned, meeting her gaze. "Because you're teaching me." She didn't smile, but her eyes lingered. For the first time, she didn't look away immediately. And in that fragile silence, something new was born. Not yet trust, not yet absolution, but the faint, undeniable possibility of both. They told her at dawn. A nurse with a soft voice and steady hands folded the discharge papers into a tidy rectangle and placed them on the rolling tray beside the bed. The blinds were angled just enough to let in a rinsed slice of morning white and thin as skimmed milk. Gianna had not slept. There was a line pressed into her cheek from the seam of the pillow, and the faint crescent of it remained, even as she nodded and said she understood what the instructions meant, how often to feed, what to watch for, which numbers required a call, which ones required running. Noah stood back, occupying the quiet, like tall men often do, not by volume, but by gravity. He had shaved clumsily. A nick on his jaw bloomed the palest red beneath his skin. Someone had brought him a t-shirt that did not fit him, and a hoodie that did. He wore both like armor. "Are you ready?" the nurse asked, but Gianna did not answer right away. The question was a cliff. Ready for what? The long stairs. The city that waited without tenderness. The hours no one would count but her. "I'm ready," she said anyway. She had learned to be. There was more paper to sign. More leaflets with infant CPR, safe sleep diagrams, and the exact angle a bottle should tilt. Gianna initialed where they pointed and signed where the lines asked for a name. Noah did not watch her hand, but she felt the heat of his attention like a winter sun. When one of the babies sighed, a breath feathering into a sound too delicate to hold, their heads turned perfectly. The room emptied of other people. The world reduced again to the rhythm of swaddled lungs, the white noise rasping from a portable machine, the hum of air that somehow carried both hospital and milk. "We need 5 car seats," Gianna murmured, practical as a metronome. "The carriers. The bags are already packed, but I've got them," Noah said. There was no promise threaded through the words, only a simple fact. He had been like that for days, removing his future tense like a splinter, and speaking in present verbs that could hold weight. He left to fetch whatever a person fetches when their life is about to change again. Gianna watched the door swing once and settle. She lifted Noel to her shoulder, where the little body seemed to recognize and nest into the slope. In the bassinet, Leora opened one eye and then the other, as though the light required negotiating. Micah made the face he always made when he was between wanting and refusing. Gabriel slept with his mouth open in surprise. When Noah returned, he was absurd and practical. Absurd because of the line of carriers slung across him, like he was migrating across tundra. Useful because none of the straps were twisted, not one, and the latches clicked into their bases with satisfying certainty. A nurse laughed softly at the sight, the kind of laughter that contains blessing. Gianna said, "Let's go home," before she could imagine how that word could fracture. The corridor had never felt so long. Noah walked before and behind her in alternating waves, holding a door, lifting a bag, glancing back, without making it a question. From room 814 to the elevator, from the elevator to the lobby, they moved in a choreography improvised that morning and learned by muscle memory in a single hour. Outside, the city inhaled them. New York was the same city it had been the day she entered labor. Disinterested, exacting, overwhelmingly alive. Taxis stitched yellow seams through the avenue. A delivery man whistled through his teeth. Somewhere a dog barked at the same pigeon it constantly barked at. The air smelled like rain, but it had not yet fallen. Gianna watched the light slide along the hood of the car Noah had brought and thought with a dull surprise that she had expected something grander. But helpful everything turns out to be ordinary. He anchored each carrier into a row that made no sense in geometry, but perfect sense in love. He left the largest space for her, and when she hesitated, he did not tell her where to sit. He only held her gaze until she pointed to the back between Sienna and Leora, and he nodded, already opening that door. They began to drive. Gianna counted the babies without looking, as you count when you have counted enough times to make numbers into a liturgy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She counted the city's turns, though she had told herself not to care which route he took past the park, where saxophone music once rose suddenly on summer nights. Past a bakery that made bread her grandmother would have approved of, through a light that changed with its mind. Noah drove like he was holding something fragile between his hands, even when he was not. He spoke only once at a red light, where a man with a cardboard sign stood and did not look at them. "Do you want to go to the river way or the faster way?" "The faster," she said, the more the word felt like an old coat put on again after seasons. He nodded. He did as asked. In the rearview mirror, his eyes met hers. Both looked away in the exact second. On the radio, someone whispered a song under their breath. The babies slept with the breath economy of saints. Harlem wore the morning differently. It held itself in the kind of light that remembers stories. The block where Gianna lived held a barber shop that had been there longer than any of them, and a bodega that always smelled like oranges and Clorox. A woman in a pink housecoat shook a rug from a window with authority. A teenage boy bounced a ball and let it thud once, twice, and then he stopped to watch Noah lift a carrier in each hand like a question answered. The building was honest about its age, a brownstone without varnish pretending to be something else. The metal mailboxes were labeled by hand. The front banister had a scratch that no one had ever sanded down. The stairwell was narrow and ordinary, a throat up which lives passed daily. Gianna climbed those stairs every time she left and returned, and months later with the babies, she took them slowly, her hand on the rail and her breath measured. There were 27 steps. She had counted them when a contraction grabbed her half between floors and would not let go until she scored her nails into the varnish. The mark was still tiny and unimportant, and she could not stop looking at it. Noah did not ask how many. He aligned his shoulders to the stair's angle, and began climbing. The carriers swung on his forearms with the awkward grace of something difficult done because it must be done. He did not complain. He did not call for help. When a neighbor opened her door a crack watching, he nodded his head once, and she nodded back, and the exchange was more complete than introductions. Gianna moved ahead to unlock the apartment door, so he would not have to set anyone down on the landing. The key turned with a notch that had always made her nervous and no longer did. The door stuck on the bottom corner. Old wood will do what old wood wants, but gave when she shouldered it with a practiced tenderness. "This is home," she said out loud, not to him, but to the universe that often required proof. Noah stood in the doorway and looked as if the room were a new country he had no right to enter and every right to wish for. He set the carriers down on the rug she had braided on a winter evening because her mind would not quiet. He did it carefully. He always did. The apartment was small enough to talk to everyone from every room simultaneously. The kitchen had one good pan and one you had to hold exactly centered on the burner if you didn't want it to tip. A plant by the window had lived on little more than stubbornness and the light that invited itself in every morning. A crib was against the wall, and 4 foldable bassinets lined up like a pale crescent moon. There was a dry erase board with a calendar of feedings that had saved her life, and a list titled, "What I Know in Handwriting," that tilted upward when she was hopeful and straightened when she was tired. Noah did not flinch at the smallness. He did not try to enlarge it with money. He did what you do when you enter a room that someone has fought hard to build. He asked the room permission. Then he moved the bassinet just 2 inches because the light was stronger at that angle. He washed his hands. He rolled up the sleeves of the ill-fitting hoodie and waited as if he had been told there was something sacred here, and he wished to show respect. "Did you assemble the crib?" he asked quietly. Not because it mattered, but because questions were a way of touching without touching. She said, "I did," and he traced his fingers along the edge where a bolt had been shy, and she coaxed it into place. He smiled with his mouth, not his teeth. It made him look younger. They began without needing to say they were starting. There was a ritual for arriving home with a fleet of tiny people. They learned it by doing. Bags were unpacked. Labels met shelves as if they had always been in love. Bottles found the sink, the drying rack, and then their places like little soldiers resigned to peace. Gianna posted the monitor near the crib. Noah learned the song the kettle made when it reached the correct insistence to set a bottle in warm water. When a neighbor knocked with a dish of something she called a casserole, because that was the word you use when there is love in a pan, Gianna accepted it and said thank you, and did not glance at Noah to see if he could handle that exchange. She already knew he could. The neighbor did not stay. She needed to get to work, and the babies needed to sleep, and there is a mercy in brevity. The first diaper change at home was ritual and comedy. Micah stared at Noah with an expression that could have been skepticism if newborns have room for such complexities. The tabs resisted. The new box of wipes did not open where it said it would. Gianna bit the inside of her cheek and did not smile. And then when Micah let out the slightest sound of repurposed thunder, she surrendered and laughed once, short and bright. Noah looked up at the sound as if someone had dropped a glass bead and rolled it toward him. Better, he asked Micah, as if bargaining were to be done. Gianna slid a blanket over Leora and brushed a curl from the baby's forehead with her knuckle. The curls were hers. The eyes belonged to both of them, and there was something relief-shaped in that. They spoke then because the room asked for it. Noah said, "I can send for supplies," carefully, and the pause around the word was a map of how not to offend. "Not staff," he added almost before she could brace. "Just things. Diapers. A better warmer." The kind that he stopped because he didn't know the sentence's end yet. "Supplies are fine," she said, after a fraction of a storm passed across her face. "People I don't know are not." He nodded, accepting the boundary like a railing on a high balcony, something you are grateful for when you lean toward the view. "It's not charity," he said, and then shook his head. "No, that's the wrong word. It's ours. They are ours. Things don't prove that," Gianna said. "Showing up does." "I know." He touched the counter with his palm, as if the laminate could translate something for him. "I'm not trying to buy my way in." She looked at him for a measured beat. The air between them was not warm or cold. It was that precise temperature where breath shows if you look closely. "Good," she said, "because there isn't a receipt for this." Noah's phone vibrated on the table's edge with the insect-frantic insistence that only specific texts carry. He did not reach for it. It sang again. He looked at it once, how a person glances at a life they have stepped away from to keep another one from falling. The name on the screen flashed with a board member's impatience. He turned the phone face down. The sound became muffled, and in that small muffling the room exhaled. "Are you going to get that?" Gianna asked, not challenge, but curiosity. "No," he said, "not now." He poured hot water into a mug without looking, and set a tea bag to steep. He made another, and placed it near her hand, which did not reach at first, and then did. Steam wrote cursive in the air. The babies slept at angles that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Outside somewhere, a siren passed without urgency. It was midday when the apartment taught them its light. It pooled on the floorboards in a rectangle the exact size of a blanket. Sienna caught the edge of it on her cheek and sighed in her sleep as if the sun had told her a joke and she had decided to pretend to understand. Gianna watched that, and then she watched Noah watching that, and the quiet between them changed shape again. He moved the bassinet an inch less glare. She nodded. Good. He washed bottles in a rhythm that would become theirs. She wrote down the last feeding time because paper remembers when the brain cannot. He lifted Gabriel and found the sway that worked best 2 inches. Left 1 right, repeat. She closed her eyes for 60 seconds and dreamed of nothing. The kettle made its small music and then was still. Later, There was the problem of where he would sleep. It arrived like every other problem had arrived since they got home calmly, as if it had been waiting on the same turn of the clock all along. The couch, Noah said before she could suggest anything that would make this into an argument. Or the floor. Or the chair. I'm not particular. It's not about particular, Gianna said. It's about what is possible. He looked at the couch. Narrow, honest, reliable. He measured the distance to the bassinet corral with his eyes. This is possible, he said. She left and returned with a folded blanket that had once belonged to her mother and always smelled faintly like a drawer you open in a childhood home, even when you are grown. She placed it on the arm of the couch, not in his hands, because that felt like an intimacy they hadn't earned. He understood the math of that. Thank you, he said anyway. Twilight leaked into the room asymmetrically. The city's sounds changed. The world turned from delivery to return. A neighbor's radio sent a Motown chorus up the stairwell, like a rope tossed over a ledge. Someone argued amiably on the sidewalk about nothing and everything. The radiator clicked twice, and then endeavored to be useful. The babies woke and slept and woke again, small tides with their own moon. Noah learned how the hallway light framed the door when it was ajar, and how to step around the creak in the third floorboard from the kitchen. Gianna knew she did not feel guilt when her hands loosened and her shoulders dropped half an inch. She felt something like oxygen. After the last bottle of daylight, there was a pause. The kind that happens between acts, before the curtain rises again, and everyone in the audience coughs at once, as if rehearsed. They sat, she on the floor, her back to the couch. He was on the sofa, his foot almost touching her shoulder, and not. They looked at nothing for a long while. Why this block? He asked finally low. Because the bodega gives free bananas to kids, she said. And Mrs. Alvarez across the hall knows when to knock and when not to. And the laundromat man keeps quarters aside for me because he says the machine eats women's work faster than men's. He nodded. He tasted the neighborhood in his mouth like something almost remembered. It's good, he said, and meant it. She said I needed a place that didn't ask me to explain myself. He could have said I understand. He could have said I am learning not to be a place that asks. He said nothing. Sometimes the kindest answers live without words. Night arrived fully, but not rudely. Lamps pooled yellow on surfaces that had learned to be touched carefully. The skyline beyond the window cut into a new arrangement of squares and navy. The plant by the window looked like it had grown an inch just by surviving another day. Can I? He began and stopped. May I check them once more before we? You may, she said, and the formality of it made him smile without turning it into a joke. He stood and leaned over each bassinet, with a reverence that had become habit. He placed a finger near his nose to feel the tiny breath on his skin. He tucked a corner. He let his hand rest a fraction too long where he would have pulled away 10 days ago. He measured the miracle of it, not with math, but with something quieter. Gianna watched him. She did not think he was trying to perform for her. He did not move like a person who knew he was being watched. Perhaps that was the newness, the lack of theater, the lowering of a curtain that had never belonged to her. He returned to the couch. He sat. She remained on the floor. The distance between their shoulders was measurably small and effectively vast. It felt correct for the hour. 27 steps, he said into the room almost to himself. She tilted her head. What? The stairs, he said. I didn't count them going up. I counted them on my legs. It felt like 27. She stared at him for a moment, and then nodded. It is. He exhaled in a way that sounded like release. I'm glad I knew without knowing. She did not tell me either. She looked down at her hands, strong, capable, nicked by all the small violences work does to you when no one is watching, and folded them together until the bones said, We are here. The first night at home, began the way most first nights start, with the feeling that morning is an impossible country and that you will arrive there with a stamp of entry no one can revoke. When the lamp was switched off and the apartment parted itself into blacks and careful grays, they did not say goodnight. They listened. To the radiator. To a car drifting by like a thought. To 5 tiny metronomes conducting the tempo of their dawns. In the dark, Noah turned his phone over once, as if to see whether the face of his other life could still recognize him. It did not light. He let it be. He closed his eyes and opened them and closed them again. Gianna lay on her side on the rug, not because she had to, but because it put her closer to the breath she had guarded alone for so long. Her back was a narrow curve, her shoulder a ridge. She did not ask for a blanket. He did not offer. Some gestures are kind and wrong at the same time. Somewhere between his second breath and his third, a baby made a sound like a violin string warmed with a thumb. He rose without thinking. So did she. They reached the basins from 2 directions simultaneously and stopped a foot apart, 2 halves of a circle not yet closed. "Go ahead," she whispered. "You first," he said. They stood there for a beat longer, the smallest smile bending the corner of her mouth, without appearing, then moved in together, unafraid of knocking elbows. 2 hands, 1 child. A new rhythm beginning in the thinnest hour, none of it grand, all authentic. The apartment greeted them differently, once the novelty of arrival faded. It was no longer only the stage for the return of 5 infants and 2 people who had once broken each other. It became a vessel for hours, for repetition, for the small, relentless acts that shaped the days into something resembling life. The first morning began not with sunlight, but with cries, thin, urgent sounds that layered one upon another, until the room seemed to pulse. Gianna was already awake. She had hardly closed her eyes. She moved quickly, gathering bottles, checking blankets, lifting one baby, while shushing another, with the press of her hand against a chest so tiny she could almost cover it with her palm. Noah stirred from the couch. The blanket had slipped to the floor, and the cushions had left faint red lines along his cheek. He blinked, disoriented for a moment, until the cries sharpened him into clarity. Then he rose. "I'll take Gabriel," he said, his voice rough from sleep. Gianna didn't argue. She passed the boy to him, with a motion at once practiced and tired. The baby squirmed in his arms, the weight unfamiliar, yet now inevitable. Noah adjusted, swayed, and slowly found a rhythm. The room smelled of warm milk, faint soap, and the sharper tang of city air seeping through imperfect windows. The radiator clanged like it had its own agenda. Outside, footsteps clicked along the pavement. Every second stretched and folded inside, carrying the fragile heaviness of beginning. It was not easy. Though steadier than before, Noah's hands still moved with the stiffness of a man trained to sign contracts, not cradle lives. The first bottle he warmed was too hot, and Gianna snatched it back with a quick shake of her head. The second was too cool, and the baby fussed until she tilted it toward her wrist and nodded. Here she murmured, guiding his hand like this. Her fingers brushed his knuckles, light, impersonal, and yet more charged than any argument they had ever had. The infants refused to follow schedules written neatly on the dry erase board. They slept when they should have been hungry, cried when they should have been resting, and sometimes stared with wide, unblinking eyes, as though they carried secrets from worlds too new to describe. Noah tried to negotiate with them as he would with adults. "You just ate. You can't possibly be hungry again." But the cries did not yield to reason. Gianna almost smiled. Almost. She moved with the knowledge carved into her bones by months of carrying them, weeks of delivering them into breath, and now endless days of surviving beside them. She could distinguish Micah's frustrated wail from Sienna's startled cry, and could predict when Leora would stir simply by the rhythm of her sighs. Noah watched, learned, and failed in equal measure. Yet every failure carved a deeper groove in his resolve. On the second morning, Gianna stood by the window, rocking Noelle against her shoulder while looking down at the street below. The block was noisy with deliveries horns and the low music of someone's radio spilling from an open car. "This place isn't meant for 6, she murmured, not turning her head. "It feels full," Noah replied, adjusting the strap of a carrier where Gabriel had finally fallen asleep against his chest. Full and crowded are different things. He didn't answer. His eyes traced the outlines of her profile in the reflection on the glass, the curl that had slipped loose from her bun, the curve of her jaw, the exhaustion that still held dignity. The world outside was his world. Skyscrapers, investors, interviews, constant noise. Yet here, looking down on cracked sidewalks and a bodega awning, he felt something steadier than all the boardrooms combined. By the third day, necessity demanded they leave. The pantry held only a scattering of cans. The diapers were half gone, and Gianna reluctantly admitted that she hadn't managed a whole grocery trip since the 7th month of her pregnancy. "I'll go," Noah said. "You don't know the brands. Then you'll tell me." She looked at him long and suspicious. "You'll get it wrong. I'll call you if I do." He did, twice. Once she talked about the exact size of diapers, numbers, and letters she had rattled off without thinking, and once she spoke of a particular formula brand with a label that was too similar to another. His voice over the line was patient, unsure. Hers was brisk, efficient. When he returned, arms laden with more than she had asked for, she scanned the bags with narrowed eyes. "You bought too much. It will be used. It's excessive." He exhaled. "I don't know how to buy small." The corner of her mouth threatened to curl but didn't. "You'll learn." It didn't take long. On the 4th morning, the tabloids carried grainy photos of a billionaire carrying car seats into a Harlem brownstone, his hair uncombed, his clothes rumpled. Headlines speculated with merciless glee. "Orion's golden boy, hiding 5 secrets." Noah saw it first. The paper had been left on the stoop. He carried it inside, folded under his arm like contraband. Gianna caught the corner of the headline as he set it down. Her jaw hardened. "They'll come here," she said. "I'll keep them away." "How with money, with presents?" he replied, though the certainty in his voice trembled. She stared at him, testing the words against the memory of his past absences. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not promising," he said. "I'm warning." The babies fussed, unaware of scandal, and the subject dissolved into necessity. But the paper stayed on the counter all day, its folded edges sharp as accusation. That evening, after the children had been fed and the apartment dimmed to its soft amber, Gianna finally broke the silence building like steam. "Why now?" she asked. Noah looked up from where he was rinsing bottles. "Why what? Why stay? Why appear after everything?" He dried his hands slowly. "Because I can't unknow what I know now. They exist. They are mine. And—" his voice faltered. "So are you." Her laugh was small and humorless. "You don't own me. I don't mean ownership." His eyes met hers across the small kitchen. "I mean belonging. I belonged to you before I knew it. I still do." Her breath caught, and she looked away down at her hands that had memorized the weight of 5 children. "Belonging isn't enough," she whispered. "No," he agreed softly, "but it's where I have to start." The silence stretched heavy and fragile. Then one of the babies stirred, breaking it like a bell. Gianna moved first, but Noah followed. They reached the crib simultaneously, their shoulders brushing as they bent toward Leora's restless form. Neither stepped back. The days stacked like cards. Each one was a little heavier than the last, and each balanced on small tendernesses that arrived without announcement. On the fifth morning, Gianna found him humming off-key as he balanced Micah and Sienna in either arm, swaying like a man learning to dance. The tune was terrible, but both infants had calmed. On the sixth, he reached instinctively for the kettle, before she could filling bottles with a precision she had once thought him incapable of. On the seventh, she realized she had slept for a stretch longer than 2 hours, for the first time in months, and when she opened her eyes, he was there, rocking Noelle with his chin tucked against her curls, the faintest smile haunting his face. One evening, Gianna sat on the rug folding the tiny clothes that seemed to multiply independently. Noah lowered himself beside her, awkward in the cramped space. He picked up a small hat, thumbed the stitching, and said quietly, "Do you remember MIT? That first night you corrected my code?" She looked at him, startled. "You hated me for it. I loved you for it," he corrected. "However, I didn't know how to say it." Her throat tightened. She folded another onesie with deliberate care. "We were different people then. Were we?" he asked, his voice low. "Or were we the same, just unshaped?" She didn't answer, but her silence was less guarded than before. By the 10th day, the rhythm had shifted. The babies still cried. The diapers are still stacked like mountains. The city still pressed against the windows with its noise and its need. But inside the apartment, something had altered. Noah no longer moved like a visitor. He moved like someone who had begun to understand the thresholds, where to place the bottles, step over the third squeaky board, and breathe in time with the cries instead of against them. And Gianna, though her mistrust still shadowed her, no longer moved entirely alone. She let him carry two at once. She let him answer the door. She once allowed herself to sit long enough to drink tea while he handled the chaos. The distance between them was still real, still jagged, but it no longer felt insurmountable. That night, when the babies were finally down, Gianna stood by the window again. The city glowed in fractured pieces. Neon signs, taxi lights, street lamps bending the night. Noah joined her, not too close, not too far. "They'll outgrow this place," he said quietly. "I know. Then we'll find another." She turned her head, eyes sharp. "We..." He held her gaze. "If you'll let me." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she looked back at the city, her reflection beside his in the glass. Two figures, one past, one possibility. And somewhere behind them, 5 tiny breaths stitched themselves into the silence, binding it all together in a rhythm neither of them could yet name. Morning did not enter the apartment quietly. It came with the rattle of delivery trucks on the street below, the smell of bread, warming in the bakery at the corner, the uneven staccato of car horns declaring themselves to no one in particular. Inside, the small home was still half-shadowed, its silence fragile and temporary. Noah had risen before the babies. He stood by the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled to his forearms, carefully measuring powder into bottles. The kettle hissed steam, brushing the ceiling, while his eyes drifted again and again toward the bassinets. Gianna lay curled on the rug, the thinnest blanket drawn to her shoulder. She had surrendered to sleep only 2 hours ago, exhaustion pulling her under like deep water. Noah had watched her fight it, refusing to close her eyes until the weight of days without rest defeated her stubbornness. He looked at her now, her curls spread against the pillow, her lips parted in unguarded slumber, and thought she was beautiful in ways the world would never print in magazines. Not for her polish, but for her persistence. For the way she had held 5 lives together when he had been nowhere near. The kettle clicked. He poured, tested, and adjusted. Noah was lifting her when Sienna stirred with her soft, urgent cry. She latched onto the bottle without hesitation. He felt the smallest triumph bloom in his chest. He had learned her rhythm. The knock came later that morning. It wasn't a neighbor's casual rhythm, a friend's hesitant tap, a neighbor's casual rhythm, or a friend's hesitant tap. It was firm, purposeful. Gianna froze mid-motion, a stack of folded blankets balanced in her arms. Her eyes cut toward the door, sharp with instinct. Noah shifted his body, angling automatically between her and the sound. "Stay here," he said, setting Gabriel gently in his bassinet before striding to the door. When he opened it, the hallway filled with the cold breath of February and two men in dark coats. One he recognized instantly, Robert Ellsworth, chairman of Orion's board. The other, a lawyer whose name he couldn't summon, but whose presence meant business had spilled over into places it didn't belong. Noah Ellsworth greeted his tone, brisk, his smile tight. "We've been looking for you. This isn't a good time." It's precisely the time Ellsworth countered his gaze flicking past Noah's shoulder. Though the angle revealed nothing but a sliver of the apartment, Noah felt Gianna's tension coil behind him. "We need to talk," Ellsworth pressed. "Orion cannot function with its CEO vanishing into thin air. Investors are restless. The press has no business here." Noah's voice sharpened. "And neither do you." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "If you refuse to cooperate, the board must consider interim leadership, perhaps permanently." Noah's jaw clenched. For years, threats like these had bent him into late nights, endless flights, and unyielding work. But now, with the weight of 5 newborns breathing inside, he felt no fear, only clarity. He closed the door. Ellsworth's muffled voice carried through the wood. "Think carefully, Noah. Legacy isn't built in hiding." The sound of retreating footsteps lingered like smoke. Gianna appeared at his side, her face pale, her arms full of blankets. "Who was that?" "The past," he answered, and then softer, "and the fight for the future." By afternoon, the street outside was no longer ordinary. Paparazzi had arrived, lenses glinting like predators' eyes. They clustered near the stoop, shouting his name, her name waving tabloids with speculative headlines. Gianna peered through the curtain, her stomach twisting. "They know where we live." Noah placed a steadying hand on the window frame. "They won't get in." "But they don't need to," she whispered. "All they need is one picture of the babies." Her voice cracked on the last word. She backed away from the glass, clutching her elbows. The thought of her children, her fragile miracles splashed across pages as curiosities rather than lives, made her chest seize. Noah turned toward her. "I'll handle it. You can't shield them forever. Then I'll shield them now." His voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. But Gianna's eyes glistened, filled with years of mistrust. "You shield yourself with money, with distance. These children need more than promises shouted through windows." Her words stung not unfairly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then let me prove it another way." "How I'll show them," he said. "I'll show everyone that this isn't a secret, that you and the children aren't shadows to be hidden." Gianna shook her head, disbelieving. "The world will tear us apart, or it will learn we can't be moved." That evening, when the crowd outside swelled, Noah did what few men of his stature would. He opened the door. Flashbulbs exploded. Shouts ricocheted against the brick. Questions rained down like sleet. Noah stood on the stoop, shoulders squared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Yes, I've been here," he said. "Yes, I have children. 5 of them. They are mine and are more critical than your headlines or speculation." The crowd gasped, cameras flashing harder, hungrier. "I will not parade them for you," he continued. "They are not a story. They are my family. And if you want to know where I've been, look here." Not in the skyscrapers, not in boardrooms. Here. The words hung in the winter air, defiant and raw. Then he closed the door. Inside, Gianna stared at him, her blankets forgotten in a heap. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He had chosen her and chosen them, publicly, without hesitation. She did not feel entirely alone for the first time in 2 years. The following days blurred into a siege. The press lingered, neighbors whispered, and the phone on the counter buzzed endlessly with calls Noah refused to take. Inside, the apartment became both a sanctuary and a pressure cooker. 5 infants demanded more than either could, yet they still gave. Noah learned to change 2 diapers in succession without fumbling. Gianna allowed herself to sleep 3 hours, trusting him not to vanish. But tension grew alongside tenderness. One night, after a fierce stretch of cries, Gianna sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. "This isn't sustainable. We'll adapt," Noah said, bouncing Micah against his shoulder. "You adapt in business. This is different. These are lives. They need stability, not improvisation." "I'm not improvising," he countered. "I'm learning." Her eyes flashed. At their expense, the words hit him hard. He looked down at Micah, the child's tiny face pressed into his shirt. At mine, he whispered. Something in her gaze softened, then just slightly. But she did not apologize. She only leaned back, exhaustion pulling her into silence. On the 5th night of the siege, the tension snapped. Gabriel began to cough, sharp, ragged, too much like the scare in the hospital. Gianna panicked, gathering him too tightly, murmuring frantic reassurances. Noah reached to help, but she recoiled. "Don't." Her voice was sharp, shaking. "Don't you dare fail him." The words were a dagger. He froze, hands suspended uselessly. For a moment, all the air in the apartment vanished. Gianna rocked Gabriel, her tears falling silent onto the baby's blanket. Noah stood helpless, crushed beneath a weight heavier than any corporate loss. Then Gabriel's cough eased his body, relaxing against her chest. Relief crashed through the room like a tide. Gianna collapsed back against the chair, her shoulders shaking. Noah knelt before her, hesitant, his hands hovering. "I'm here," he said hoarsely. "Even if you don't want me near, I'm here." She looked at him, then really looked. His eyes were red, his face lined with desperation. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the absent man of headlines, but the father. She didn't speak. She only let him place his hand over hers, and Gabriel cradled safely between them. The siege eventually ebbed. Reporters grew bored, investors shifted focus, and the street outside returned to ordinary noise. But inside, something had changed. Noah had faced the world and chosen them. Gianna had let him touch the edges of her fear. The apartment was still too small. The feedings are still relentless. The future is still uncertain. Yet in the quiet after, when the babies slept and the city hummed beyond thin walls, Gianna glanced at Noah and no longer saw a man only capable of leaving. She saw, perhaps for the first time, a man willing to stay. And that possibility, fragile, dangerous, undeniable, was more terrifying than the cameras had ever been. The apartment had grown quieter after the storm outside. The reporters, the boardroom emissaries, the endless knocking, all of it had ebbed away like a tide retreating from the shore. But tides leave traces. Sand shifted, stones exposed, and in the silence that followed, Noah and Gianna were left face to face with something neither of them had dared name. The babies slept in their semicircle of bassinets, the slight hum of a white noise machine threading the air like a lullaby. Gianna sat cross-legged on the rug, folding impossibly small socks into pairs, her movements careful but mechanical. Noah leaned against the arm of the couch, His long frame bent in a way that suggested both fatigue and persistence. He was polishing bottles one by one, his hands learning to be deliberate in ways they had never been in boardrooms. Neither spoke. But silence had stopped being absence. It had become a language. It began with something small. Gianna didn't ask him to wake at 3 in the morning when Micah stirred with his restless grumble. She didn't shake him from sleep or press the responsibility into his hands. She only waited. And Noah rose. He moved stiffly, his back sore from the couch, but he rose. He lifted Micah, soothed him, changed him, and fed him. Gianna lay awake on the rug, watching through half-closed eyes, though he didn't know it. She watched him fumble, whisper, adjust, and persist. She watched him stay. The next night, it was Noel. Then Sienna. Each time, she didn't ask. Each time, he rose. By the 4th night, Gianna closed her eyes and allowed herself 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep. It was not trust yet. It was exhaustion, but it was also the beginning of something that felt dangerously close. While the babies napped one afternoon, Gianna sat at the table with a cold mug of tea. Noah was at the counter, scribbling measurements on a scrap of paper and testing ratios of formula and water. She spoke without looking at him. "You're not used to being ordinary." He paused. "What do you mean?" "You've lived so long in a world where everyone looks at you and expects more, where the smallest thing you do becomes a headline. Here, no one applauds if you manage to change a diaper." He considered her words, then answered quietly, "That's what I need." She lifted her eyes, studying him. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his hands stained faintly with soap from bottles which were washed a dozen times. He looked nothing like the photographs she used to see on magazine covers. And somehow, he looked more like himself. "Ordinary isn't easy," she said. "I don't want it easy." His gaze met hers steady. "I want real." Her throat tightened. She looked away first. Late one night, when the babies had settled into an almost synchronized calm, Noah sat on the floor beside Gianna. The apartment was dim lit, only by the street lamp outside, filtering through the curtains. "Do you remember Chicago?" he asked suddenly. She stilled. "What about it?" "The dorm kitchen. You danced with a ladle, pretending it was a microphone. I didn't even know I loved you until that moment." Gianna exhaled softly, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You were terrible at keeping rhythm." "I still am." This time she did smile, though faintly. It flickered across her lips and vanished. But Noah saw it, and the sight struck him harder than any deal he had ever closed. "Do you regret it?" he asked carefully. She looked at him, her eyes dark steady. "Regret? What, loving me?" Silence stretched. She turned her gaze toward the bassinets, the small silhouettes breathing softly against the night. "I regret the spaces where you weren't," she said finally. Noah swallowed hard. He had no defense, no words to fill the cracks. He only whispered, "I'm here now." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't reply. Gianna resisted the idea for a week before finally relenting. The babies needed fresh air, the pediatrician had advised. And though the thought of stepping into the world with 5 tiny lives terrified her, she knew she couldn't hide forever. They dressed them carefully. Layers of soft cotton snug caps and blankets tucked around fragile limbs. The strollers were arranged like a small fleet, cumbersome but necessary. When they stepped onto the street, Gianna's chest tightened. She expected cameras, questions, and strangers reaching out. But the block was calm. A few neighbors nodded politely. A boy on a skateboard slowed to peek at the unusual procession, then darted off. Noah pushed one stroller, while Gianna guided another their pace, tentative at first, then steadier. The babies slept through the outing, unaware of the monumental step it was for their parents. As they rounded the corner by the park, Gianna found herself exhaling. The city still roared, still demanded, but within this small bubble, they were simply two parents taking their children for air. Ordinary, human. She glanced at Noah, his hand steady on the stroller handle, and felt a ripple of something she hadn't allowed herself in years' possibility. That evening back inside, the impossible happened. Noel curled against Gianna's chest, let out a sound that wasn't a cry or a sigh, but a soft, bubbling giggle. It startled them both. Gianna froze, staring at her daughter, as though she had spoken words instead of laughter. Noah looked up sharply. Was that Gianna? Nodded, eyes wide. Another giggle followed, brighter this time, filling the apartment with a music more potent than any lullaby. Both parents laughed too momentarily, an unguarded simultaneous sound that caught them off balance. Gianna pressed her lips to Noel's curls, tears stinging her eyes. Noah sat across from her, his face lit with awe. It was small, a moment no one else in the world would record or remember. But for them, it was seismic. Proof that joy could bloom in the cracks of exhaustion and history. But healing never follows a straight line. One night, as Gianna scribbled feeding times on the board, Noah spoke without thinking. "We'll need a bigger place soon." She stiffened. "This is my home." "I know," he said carefully, "but it's not built for 5 growing children." Her eyes snapped toward him. "Don't try to replace what I've made because it doesn't fit your standards." "That's not what I meant." "It's precisely what you meant." Her voice sharpened. "This place kept us alive. Every corner is measured, every drawer planned. Please don't walk in now and decide it isn't enough." Noah flinched, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't say it wasn't enough. I said they'll need more. And so will you." The air between them burned with unspoken things. His wealth, her pride, the long chasm of 2 years apart. Finally, Gianna turned away. "Don't make decisions for us. Not again." Her words were final. The conversation ended, but Noah felt the wound linger long after the room quieted. 2 days later, Gianna returned from the laundromat to find Noah crouched by the wall, screwing something into the plaster. "What are you doing?" she asked, wary. He stepped back, revealing a row of hooks at just the right height for carriers, jackets, and bags. Each hook was labeled with a name: Leora, Noel, Sienna, Micah, Gabriel, written in careful ink. "It's nothing big," he said quickly, "just organization, so you don't have to trip over bags by the door." Gianna stared at the hooks, her throat tight. She hadn't asked. He hadn't imposed. He had only noticed. Her lips parted, but no words came. She hung the diaper bag on Gabriel's hook and walked away before he could see her eyes glisten. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, they sat across from each other on the rug. Between them, Sienna cooed softly, her tiny fingers reaching upward. Gianna stroked the baby's hand absent-mindedly. "Sometimes I wonder if I built walls so high that I can't climb them anymore." Noah's breath caught. "You had to survive." She looked up at him, her eyes searching. "And if I can't take them down?" He leaned forward, his voice low, trembling. "Then I'll build beside them, as long as it takes." The words hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, true. Gianna didn't answer, but she didn't look away. Days blurred into weeks. The babies grew subtle shifts. Only a mother and a man who had begun to pay attention could see Leora's eyes lingering longer on faces, Micah's stubborn refusal to be soothed, except by Noah's awkward humming, Noel's laugh coming easier, Sienna's first attempts to roll Gabriel's quiet strength after his early scares. And between these milestones, Noah and Gianna circled each other, not lovers, strangers, allies, enemies. Something in between, shadows and light. Some nights, They spoke of memories, fragments of the past that still stung. Other nights, they said nothing, only sitting side by side, while 5 tiny heartbeats filled the room. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was living. And for 2 people who had once chosen absence, that alone was extraordinary. The days had begun to stretch differently. Not lighter, never that, but less jagged, less heavy with suspicion. The rhythm of the apartment was no longer pure survival. It was routine, imperfect, but holding. Diapers, feedings, lullabies, midnight stirrings all blurred into a cadence that felt almost like music. And yet between that rhythm, another tension hummed. Not just exhaustion, not just the demands of 5 fragile lives. It was something subtler, harder to name, the old pulse of familiarity, the unfinished gravity between 2 people who had once loved fiercely and then fractured completely. It happened in moments so small they could have been overlooked. Gianna reached for a bottle on the counter, just as Noah did. Their hands brushed warm skin against skin, and both froze for a breath too long. She withdrew first quickly, but her pulse raced against her wrist. Another evening, as rain slicked the windows, she bent to lift Sienna, her body swaying under the weight of fatigue. Noah was beside her before she knew it, his hand at the small of her back steadying her. The touch was brief, instinctive, but it lingered in her bones. Even laughter began to creep in, reluctant and shy. Once when Gabriel sneezed so loudly, it startled Micah into crying. Noah muttered, "That's my scowl in sound form." And Gianna laughed. Not fully, just one unguarded sound that slipped free before she pressed it down again. But Noah carried that sound through the night like a flame cupped in his palm. One morning, after Gianna left briefly to speak with a neighbor, Noah found a folded sheet of paper tucked between the pages of a notebook on the counter. He hadn't meant to pry, but the words caught his eye before he realized what they were. Noah, I tried to tell you. I called. I wrote. I begged the silence to break. You were unreachable. That's how you wanted it. Perhaps I was foolish to keep hoping, but I wanted you to know there are 5 of them. They look like you. And I don't know if I can forgive you for not being here, even if you didn't know. His chest tightened. He closed the notebook carefully, his hands trembling. He had never received the letter. He had built empires while she had written words to an empty absence. When Gianna returned, he said nothing. But that night, as he fed Leora in the quiet dark, his eyes stung with something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Regret. It began with Sienna's cough. Small at first, just a rough sound in the back of her throat. Gianna noticed immediately her body tensing. She hovered over the bassinet, her ears trained for every sound. By evening, the cough grew sharper, rattling. Noah watched fear seize Gianna's face as she pressed her hand to Sienna's tiny chest, feeling each uneven rise. Gianna said, "We're taking her," in her voice, steady but urgent. The hospital was only 10 blocks away, but the journey felt endless. Noah drove his knuckles white on the wheel. Gianna sat in the back. Sienna's small body cradled close, whispering, soothing nonsense, while her heart raced. The doctors admitted her overnight oxygen monitors, soft beeps, sterile walls again. Gianna paced the floor, unable to sit. Noah stood beside her, steady but helpless, his presence the only anchor he could offer. At dawn, the doctor reassured them it was bronchitis, not pneumonia. With treatment, she would recover. Relief flooded Gianna so violently that she nearly collapsed into the chair. Noah guided her down, his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. They stayed at the hospital until evening. By the time they returned to the apartment with Sienna, both were hollowed by fear, but bound by the shared relief of survival. After settling all 5 again that night, Gianna sat by the window, her face hidden in shadow. Noah approached quietly, the lamplight tracing the exhaustion on his features. He said softly that you shouldn't have had to go through that alone. She didn't turn. But I did for months. Every kick, every fear, every night I thought I might not make it through the next day. His voice cracked. I would have been there if I'd known. You didn't want to know, she whispered. Her shoulders shook once barely visible. You shut every door before I had the chance. Silence pressed between them. Noah lowered himself beside her close, but not touching. Then, let me be here now. Let me carry even a fraction of what you've taken. For a long time, she said nothing. But when she finally turned her head, her eyes were wet and fierce. I can't let you back in. He held her gaze. Then don't. Just let me stay near. Her breath caught, and she didn't answer, but she didn't move away. In the days that followed, Gianna found herself remembering without permission. The first time he kissed her in the back row of the lecture hall, when they were both 20 and too proud to admit they were already in love. The nights coding side by side, her curls falling into her face, while his laughter filled the small apartment they once shared. He had whispered her name in sleep, as though even dreams couldn't let her go. Memories hurt, but they also softened. And sometimes when Noah rocked a child with clumsy tenderness, or hummed off key while warming bottles, the ache of those memories blurred into something new, whether love broken once could be remade. It happened on a quiet afternoon. The babies were napping, and the apartment was wrapped in rare silence. When Noah approached her to reach for a towel, Gianna stood at the sink rinsing bottles. They turned at the same time. Too close. Her breath caught. His eyes locked on hers, raw searching. The distance between them was no more than a breath. The world stilled. But Gianna stepped back first, her heart hammering. Don't. Noah froze, pain flickering across his features. He nodded once, stepping away, respecting the boundary, even as it carved him open. The moment dissolved. But the electricity lingered undeniable. By the second week, the apartment felt less like a battlefield and more like a fragile truce. Noah no longer hovered, as if uncertain of his place. He moved naturally now, part of the routine, his presence as woven into the space as the hum of the kettle or the creak of the third floorboard. Gianna still held her walls, but they had cracks. She allowed him to brush past her in the narrow kitchen without tensing. She let his laughter settle into the room without banishing it. She leaned against the couch while he rocked Micah her shoulder, brushing his without flinching. They weren't healed. They weren't whole. But they were no longer breaking. Late one night, they stood together over the bassinets after the last feeding. The babies slept in their small constellation of dreams. Gianna folded her arms, her face soft in the lamplight. Do you ever think we were too different from the start? Noah looked down at Gabriel's tiny fist curled against his blanket. I used to think that. But now, I believe love isn't about finding someone who is the same. It's about building a bridge wide enough for both. She studied him, her eyes unreadable. And if the bridge collapses, then we build again, he whispered, as many times as it takes. The room fell silent, filled only by the steady rhythm of 5 heartbeats. Between them, the distance was still real, but it was narrower now. Narrow enough that for the first time, Gianna allowed herself to believe it might one day be crossed. The snow came suddenly, like the city had conspired overnight to soften its edges. By morning, the streets outside Gianna's apartment were muffled in white footsteps, disappearing almost as soon as they were made. Harlem was hushed, the usual thrum of traffic buried beneath a quilt of silence. Inside the apartment was no less chaotic. 5 infants did not care for the poetry of snow. But there was something different in the air, a kind of intimacy born not from words, but from survival. Noah cradled Micah against his chest at the window, while the boy's wide eyes tracked the flakes drifting beyond the glass. Gianna watched from across the room, Sienna in her arms, and for a fleeting moment, she saw him as she once had, not the mogul, not the absentee, but simply a man, marveling at the world's smallness through a child's eyes. "First snow," he murmured, though the words were more to Micah than to her. Gianna didn't answer. She pressed her lips to Sienna's soft curls and breathed in the scent of milk and warmth. But her chest tightened. Snow had always meant memory cocoa and laughter, the warmth of mittens pressed to glass, the quiet rhythm of belonging. She had taught herself not to miss it. Yet now standing here, it threatened to undo her. The days passed in their demanding sameness. Bottles, diapers, cries, rare snatches of sleep. But something had shifted between them. Noah no longer hovered like a guest. He moved through the apartment with a presence that threaded itself into the routine measuring formula, lifting carriers humming tunelessly to soothe cries. And Gianna, though she fought it, began to yield to the rhythm he created beside hers. She found herself watching him when she shouldn't. The way his shoulders hunched when he bent over a bassinet, the curve of his jaw when he fell asleep upright on the couch, the careful way he adjusted each blanket as though protecting them were the most natural thing in the world. One night, when he rose before she did, to settle Leora, she lay on the rug, listening. His voice was low, a murmur she couldn't quite make out, but the cadence was steady. For the first time, Gianna closed her eyes and let sleep take her, trusting someone else to hold the silence. It was the fight that pushed them closer. Gianna had been balancing Noelle on her hip while trying to fold laundry when Noah came in, arms heavy with grocery bags. He set them on the counter, the thud sharper than necessary. "You bought too much," she said without looking up. "They'll need it. We don't have space. We'll make space." She turned her eyes, flaring. "You can't just throw money at every corner of this apartment. You can't fix everything with more." Noah's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to fix everything. I'm trying to help." "Help." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "You show up after years of silence and think help is bags of formula and boxes stacked against walls. I've kept standing with nothing but my hands." The words cut. His face shifted, wounded. He stepped closer, voice low but fierce. "Is this easy for me? That I don't see every reminder of where I wasn't, every cry I didn't answer? I'm here now. Gianna, that's all I can be. Here. Now." Her chest heaved, her throat burning with unshed words. For a moment, neither moved, the air between them jagged and raw. Then one of the babies cried, shattering the silence. Gianna turned away sharply, blinking hard. Noah exhaled, his shoulders slumping. He reached for Gabriel, his hands trembling slightly, and soothed the boy against his chest. The apartment filled again with the sounds of survival. But something deeper had cracked open. Later that night, when the children were finally down, Gianna moved to the sink to wash bottles. Her hands were steady, but her chest still echoed with the argument. Noah stood beside her, drying each piece without being asked. The silence was different now, not cold, not distant, but tense, vibrating with something unspoken. When she dropped one of the nipples into the water, he reached in at the same time she did. Their fingers collided, slick and warm, lingering an instant too long. Gianna froze. Noah's eyes found hers, dark and searching. The hum of the faucet filled the space between them, louder than any words. She pulled back first, her breath shallow. "Don't," she whispered, though her voice betrayed more plea than command. He nodded, stepping back, but the air between them refused to settle. It happened the following evening. Gianna had been pacing with Leora for nearly an hour, her arms aching, her patience thinning. The baby refused to calm her cries, sharp and unrelenting. Noah appeared quietly at her side, holding out his arms. "Let me." She hesitated, then surrendered the infant into his embrace. Noah swayed, murmuring something low, off-key, entirely tender. Slowly, impossibly, Leora quieted. Gianna sank into the chair, her body trembling with fatigue. She pressed her palms to her eyes, but tears still broke through. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Not like this. Not forever." Noah turned toward her, and Leora pressed against his chest. "You won't have to. Not alone." Her breath caught. She looked at him then, not the man she had once loved, not the mogul the world adored, but this version worn imperfect raw, holding their daughter with a reverence that broke her. And before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "You hurt me." His eyes darkened. "I know. You left me. I know." His voice cracked. "And I'll regret it until my last breath." Silence. Heavy. Fragile. Then Gianna rose slowly, her body moving before her mind could stop it. She stepped closer, so close she could feel his heat, the rhythm of his breath, and the steady heartbeat where Leora's head rested. Her fingers trembled as they brushed his sleeve, a touch so light it could have been an accident. But it wasn't. Noah froze, his eyes locked on hers, a question suspended between them. And Gianna, tired, broken, longing, did not step back. It was not planned. It was not polished. It was not the kind of kiss remembered for its perfection. It was hesitant trembling born of exhaustion and years of longing unspoken. Gianna leaned in first, her lips brushing his soft as confession. Noah inhaled sharply, then met her halfway, his mouth pressing against hers with a hunger restrained but undeniable. Leora stirred between them, but they did not break. The kiss deepened tentatively, giving way to certainty. Silence yielding to the truth neither dared to know. When Gianna finally pulled back, her chest heaved, her eyes wide, wet, afraid. "Noah." He shook his head softly, his forehead resting against hers. "You don't have to say it. Not yet. Just let me feel this." Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes, her breath mingling with his. She did not feel entirely alone in the world for the first time in years. The next morning dawned pale, the snow still thick on the streets. Inside the apartment carried a new silence, one not of distance, but of uncertainty. Gianna moved through the motions, feeding, burping, rocking, but her mind replayed the kiss like a loop. She didn't know if it had been forgiveness, weakness, need, or hope. All she knew was that it had shifted something she could not move back. Noah said nothing. He moved beside her, steady, present, as though the kiss had been everything and nothing. But sometimes she caught him looking at her, his eyes softer than they had any right to be. And when their hands brushed again at the counter, she didn't pull away this time. Days passed. The kiss was not repeated, not spoken of, but it lingered in every silence, every touch, every look that held a fraction too long. Gianna fought herself with every heartbeat. She had walls for a reason. She had built them out of necessity, out of survival. But Noah's presence chipped at them daily, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. With every midnight feeding, he rose for every diaper. He fumbled through every lullaby. He hummed without shame. And she hated how much she wanted to believe him. One night, as the snow melted outside and the city regained rhythm, Gianna stood by the window, arms folded. Noah came to stand beside her, close, but not touching. "You don't have to forgive me," he said quietly. "Not now. Maybe not ever. But please don't shut the door on what we could still be." Her throat tightened. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. And what if I let you in and you leave again? His answer was immediate, steady. Then I'll spend every day proving I won't. The silence stretched. Gianna turned to the window, her reflection trembling beside his. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. The snow had melted into slush, the sidewalks loud again, with footsteps, horns, and the restless hum of the city. Life in Harlem returned to its familiar rhythm, but something had shifted inside Gianna's small apartment. The kiss, fragile, trembling, born of exhaustion and longing, had rewritten the silence between them. It was no longer a distance. It was a possibility. Noah moved differently now. Not with caution as he once had, and not arrogance. He moved with a quiet surety, as though each step was a promise. As though staying wasn't a decision he made each day, but a truth already sewn into his body. And Gianna, though she fought it, found her own movements softening in response. She let his shoulder brush hers in the narrow kitchen. She let his laughter fill the air without pushing it back. She let herself watch him longer, when he rocked one of the children, his eyes tender in ways the world had never seen. But its fragility scared her more than the loneliness had. It came on a morning when the babies were strangely quiet, all 5 asleep at once. The sunlight draped itself across the room in soft bands, and Gianna stood at the window, arms folded, staring at the street below. "We can't live like this forever," she said without turning. Noah looked up from where he sat folding laundry with deliberate care. "Like what? In this space, these walls, this halfway life." Her voice trembled. "They'll grow. They'll need more than this. And She stopped, pressing her lips together. "You..." "What?" he asked gently. Her eyes glistened as she turned toward him. "I can't do it alone anymore. But I don't know how to let you in without breaking again." He set the tiny shirt aside and rose, his movements careful, measured. He stopped a step away, giving her space but not retreating. "Then don't let me in all at once. Let me build beside you, a wall at a time, a room at a time, until it feels like a house you trust." Her throat tightened. The image was too vivid, too tender. A house not of brick and glass, but of presence, of tomorrow. The babies woke in turns that evening, their cries weaving a restless symphony. Gianna had risen 3 times, her body swaying with fatigue. On the 4th, Noah stopped her. "Sleep," he said firmly. "I'll take this one." She shook her head. "You don't know how to." But he was lifting Noelle with surprising ease, his voice low and steady. "I'll figure it out." And he did. Imperfection, clumsiness, but enough. Gianna lay back down on the rug, her body trembling with exhaustion, and for the first time since their birth, she slept 4 uninterrupted hours. When she woke, dawn spilled across the floor. The babies were quiet. Noah was slumped on the couch, Noelle curled against his chest, both breathing in a rhythm that almost looked like prayer. Something inside her cracked. Not with pain this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. It couldn't last untouched. A week later, Orion's board called again. This time not through messengers at the door, but through Noah's phone buzzing with relentless insistence. He silenced it once, twice. But on the 3rd, Gianna caught his expression, the weight in his eyes, the shadow of the world he had built pressing in again. "You can't ignore it forever," she said quietly. "I can try." She studied him. "But will you resent me for it? For keeping you here when your empire calls?" He shook his head. "The empire can wait. This..." He gestured to the bassinets. To her can't. Her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him, needed to. But she also knew what ambition did to men like him. It consumed. It demanded. And love was too easily lost in its shadow. "Then prove it," she whispered. He met her gaze steady. I will. Noah returned from an errand 2 days later, carrying only a plain cardboard box. Inside were 5 small frames, each holding a photograph he had taken with his phone. Leora yawning, Sienna's first half roll, Noelle's laugh, Micah's scowl, Gabriel's wide-eyed stare. He hung them carefully on the wall above the bassinets. Crooked, imperfect, but real. Gianna watched her chest tight. He wasn't buying. Mansions wasn't brandishing promises. He was making their life visible, giving it weight beyond memory. When he finished, he stepped back, hands in his pockets. It's not much, he said softly, but it's ours. Gianna pressed her fingers to her lips, hiding the tremor there. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The air between them held it. That night, after the last feeding, they sat on the floor, their backs against the couch. The babies slept. The city hummed beyond the thin walls, and the air smelled faintly of milk and lavender soap. Gianna broke the silence first. I don't know if I can ever love you as I did before. Noah turned his head, his expression unreadable. I don't want what we had before. She blinked. You don't. He shook his head. Before I was blind. I measured love by success appearances and what I thought it should look like. I don't want that. I want this. Messy, exhausting, real. If you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can love you better than I ever did. Her chest ached. Her throat burned. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. And this time, when Noah reached to brush one away with his thumb, she didn't pull back. It was different from the first. Not hesitant, not trembling, but steady, certain. Gianna leaned into it this time, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him, as though afraid the world might steal the moment. Noah kissed her with a reverence that spoke of years lost and 1,000 tomorrows he wanted to earn. When they parted, her forehead rested against his, her breath trembled. Don't leave again. Never, he whispered. And for the first time she almost believed him. The days that followed were still chaotic. Babies cried, diapers piled, bottles clattered. But woven through it was something new. Laughter that didn't feel stolen, touches that didn't feel forbidden. Conversations that reached deeper than survival. They began to speak of the future cautiously at first. A larger place near the park. A rhythm that might allow Gianna to return to her work code and herself beyond motherhood. Noah stepped back from Orion, appointing someone else to hold the reins. None of it was decided. All of it was fragile. But it was their plans, sketches, hope. One evening, as twilight painted the apartment in soft gold, Noah knelt beside the bassinets, his hands resting lightly on the edge. Gianna stood behind him, watching. They deserve a father who shows up, he whispered. And I swear they'll have one. His voice cracked on the last word. Gianna stepped forward, laying her hand gently on his shoulder. They already do, she said softly. Noah turned, his eyes shining. And in that look, Gianna finally let herself believe in tomorrow. The story didn't end there. It couldn't. Life would still test them. The world outside would still demand. But something had taken root inside those walls and that fragile, ordinary apartment. Not perfection, not fairy tale certainty, but the choice to stay. The option to build. The option to love again, slowly, piece by piece. And maybe that was the most extraordinary thing of all. Share your thoughts below if their journey has touched you. The fragility, the forgiveness, the fire of second chances. Tell us the moments that moved you, the words that stayed with you. Don't forget to like this story and follow so you can walk us through more tales of love, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to stay. Because sometimes The most powerful stories aren't about the ones who never falter. They're about the ones who break, rebuild, and choose each other anyway.